A hearty welcome to all. In our learning journey, we are now at Vishnu Prayag, and here we have 18 concepts to be understood before moving ahead. In that, the first concept we will discuss is Pratisvara, paryasa. Now we are going to analyze this concept based purely on science, where we have studies conducted while taking the live MRI scanned images of brain when learning is happening. Analyzing how our brain works with this scientific approach, we shall first understand exactly how our brain grasps any information. The first point we have to know is that for us to interact with our world and our surroundings, we have 5 senses in our body. To see and understand, we have eyes. To hear and understand, we have ears. Brain grasps any. We have nose. To taste and feel the food, we have tongue. And finally, to feel by touching objects, we have skin. So any information we grasp or anything we learn happen with our 5 senses: eyes, ears, nose, tongue and skin, where we experience vision, sound, smell, taste and touch. Now all the activity we do in our body are all controlled by one master, and the master of our entire body is our brain. Whatever action we want to perform is made possible only through the brain. For example, now to stop this video by pressing the stop button or to play it again, we have to first give this command to our brain, and only through the brain we can do it. A vast network of nerves and a neural network running all over the body is used by our brain to perform any action. Now, all our 5 senses are also connected to the brain through a network of neural system and nerves. Whatever we see, whatever we hear, whatever we smell, whatever we taste or whatever we touch, all this information are sent as an electric signal through the neural network to our brain. Now coming to our brain, it is one of the most magical devices to be created on this universe. With so many technological advancement today, we are able to repair and modify any part of the human body. Like if the blood gets blocked, we can perform bypass surgery. If kidneys does not work, we can do dialysis and make it work. We can have artificial legs, artificial hands. But even today, the only human part that no medical science is able to repair or modify is the brain. If something goes wrong in the brain, nothing can be done, because the brain is the most sophisticated and the most complicated part in our body, with lakhs and lakhs of neurons and neural network, making it impossible to crack how it actually works. Now, let us know the structure of this most complicated human part, the brain. Now, let us enter inside this magical human part, the brain, and see what is actually this brain and its various parts. When we see the brain, 85% of it is made up of one large part, which we call it as cerebrum. This is where all the electrical signal coming from our senses reaches and gets stored. This is where we think. This is what controls all the muscles of our body, and due to that, we are able to walk, run or move any of our body part. The cerebrum is connected to the muscles of our body through a neural network, and sending signal through this network, the cerebrum makes us move or perform any action in our body. The second part that we see here at the bottom is called as cerebellum. This cerebellum can be called as a motor that operates all the actions from our brain. It is basically responsible to maintain balance in our movement. For example, we walk with 2 legs, we drive a 2-wheeler cycle, and all this is possible due to this electromagnetic device, cerebellum. If this gets damaged or if any problem occurs in the cerebellum, then humans will lose their balance and will have problem in their movement and judgments. This cerebellum plays a key role in the physical skill of humans, like sports. For example, when we are playing cricket, without our idea, we are able to track the fast moving ball and adjust our bat position to bring the ball to the center of the bat and hit a 6. This cerebellum is responsible for us to spontaneously calculate the exact force needed to make a hockey ball cross our opponents when we are running, based on our movement speed and the opponent position. This is a magical electromagnetic chip that exists in our body, and it plays a key role in enhancing the performance skills of sports persons. Then the third part in our brain is the brain stem. It is connected to the spinal cord of our body. Before we understand about the brain stem, first let us know about the actions that we perform in our body. The actions that happens in our body are of 3 types. The first type is the voluntary actions. For example, if we need to lift our hand, if we need to run, or if we need to learn something by reading a book, all these actions are carried out based on the decisions we take in our mind. These are the actions on which humans have total control, and they are called as voluntary actions. Now the second type of actions are the involuntary actions. Say for example, you are walking in a street and suddenly a dog chases you. So in fear, you start running. When you run, more energy is needed, and to deliver that energy to the body, the blood needs to flow faster and at a greater pressure. When blood increases its speed and pressure, then to pump in greater oxygen to the blood, the lungs has to now pump the air in and out from our nose and mouth at a greater speed, and this makes us breathe faster when we run. Now here, running is a voluntary action. But based on this voluntary action, to meet the requirement of the greater energy consumption during running, our heart has to pump blood faster, our lung has to pump air faster and make us breathe faster, and all these actions that happens in our body without our knowledge or consent are called as involuntary actions. These involuntary actions are also performed by our brain, and it is carried out through this brainstem and the spinal cord. Another example is that when we have food, all the actions that our digestive system has to perform are automatically done, and these kind of actions are controlled by the brain stem. So basically the part brain stem which is on the back of our brain is to control and execute all the involuntary actions of our body. Now the third type of action we perform in our body is called as reflex actions. An example to this is when we are stuck by a thorn in our leg, or if we are picked by a pin, without our knowledge we pull out our hands, and this kind of reflex actions are actually controlled by the fourth part of our brain, which we call it as amygdala. This amygdala is an almond shaped part in our brain, and it is placed at the bottom of our brain. This also contains the survival instinct, which always makes us perform reflex action to survive from threats. Also, this part amygdala is related to generation of human emotions like happiness, sad, worries, angry, etc. Amygdala also holds memories related to feelings. For example, the very first place we met our girlfriend on our first date, our first aeroplane journey, and so this kind of memories which are related with feelings are stored by this amygdala. So these are the four most important parts of our brain. Now when it comes to learning, the main human part involved in learning is the cerebrum. In our daily life, we keep seeing images in our eyes, we keep hearing sounds, we keep smelling, we keep enjoying various tastes of food, and also keep feeling various objects through touch, and all these electric impulses from the five senses are constantly sent to a region in the cerebrum front, which we call as the prefrontal cortex. This prefrontal cortex can be considered as a temporary memory or as short-term memory. This process can be compared to a computer or a mobile phone. For example, when we create a document in computer and then type some information, that information is held in the computer memory or temporary memory. And if we switch off the computer, then all this information will be gone forever. So in the computer, to store an information permanently, we use a hard disk. So, in our file, when we choose save, the file will be permanently stored in our machine, in the hard disk, and now it can be retracted any time needed, knowing the file name and its location. Now, similar to this process, even in our brain, prefrontal cortex is like our temporary memory. And apart from this, we have another part in our brain cerebrum, which we call as hippocampus. This will be in the bottom center of our brain, and this is similar to the hard disk we have in our computer. Just like in our computer, we use the save command to save file or information to hard disk to permanently store it. In our brain, we have to save it to hippocampus from the temporary memory of prefrontal cortex, and the save command for this process is generated by changing the way we acquire information from our five senses. Well, as the information from all senses are flowing continuously to the brain, if you want to tell the brain that a particular information is very important and I want to store it in my hippocampus, then we should follow a process of information acquisition. and this process is what we call as Pratisvara. Now in our body, the information from our five senses keep flowing to the prefrontal cortex. And now say for example, we hear something in our ear. For example, an important information is told and now I want to store it. Now if I want to tell my brain to store this information, then all I have to do is, I have to then cut off all the information coming from the other four senses and allow only the information coming from our ear reach the brain. And this way, the brain will now know this is important and it will make preparation to store and send it to hippocampus. To make it clearer, our five senses generate five signals. But our brain has only one recorder to record it to the hippocampus. So if we give all the five signals to this one recorder, none of them will be recorded correctly. So what we have to do is, we have to first choose which is the most important information that is needed to be recorded, and only that sense information has to be sent to recorder. And other four information coming from the other four senses has to be completely blocked. This process of allowing only the chosen signal to go to the brain and blocking all other signals from reaching the brain is what we call as the process of Pratiswara. For example, in the home, we are sitting and watching TV. Sitting by the side, our wife is saying something. Our nose is fed with the beautiful odor of a nice dish like bisibele bath, and our tongue is tasting it and enjoying it. And our hand is on the TV remote and feeling the buttons to change the channels. So now we have all the five sense information freely flowing to the brain, and now we cannot memorize or store any of that information in our brain. Now, there is a very important matter my wife is going to say. For example, she is going to say her bank account PIN number. It is now has to get stored in our brain. So to get that information, what we have to do first is, we have to switch off the TV, stop smelling the delicious dish bisibele bath, stop eating it, and keep the remote down. And by this, put all our four senses except ear in mute mode, and now we have to tell our wife to say the PIN number. Now when we have blocked all the information and give our brain only the audio of our wife PIN number, the brain will effectively send that information from the prefrontal cortex to hippocampus, and there it will get effectively stored. So, the process of blocking all the senses except the one we want to grasp and keep all our concentration only on the one sense and one information when we are sending it to the brain is what we call as the process of Pratiswara. Now, this is the most important concept to be understood in learning. If we want to learn and know something, and if we want to keep that information in our brain for a longer time, then the only way we can do it is by making only the channel of that information open to brain, and other four channels coming from the other four senses has to be totally blocked. To tell it even simpler, our five senses have to coordinate with one another and should work as one single sense of information. This concept of Pratiswara is very beautifully illustrated in our ancient learning system, Mimamsa. According to Mimamsa, our body is considered as a chariot. It is driven by 5 horses, and these 5 horses are our 5 senses. Now the person who is driving this horse, the charioteer or the driver, is our brain. So now when we are grasping the information, it means that during that period, this chariot has to be in the running state. Now, to move this chariot on a given path, the chariot or the driver has to see that all the 5 horses are now running in a coordinated way in one direction. So this state of our brain controlling our 5 senses to work in coordination to move in one direction is what we call as the Pratiswara mode in Mimamsa. If by chance this fails, then in the 5 horses, one will be running left, one will try to run on the right side, and one will try to run in the straight way. And this results in our chariot, that is our body, being pulled and subjected to push and pull in all directions, and this will result in body pain. This state is what we call as stress. So as a teacher, before we start our class or our teaching process, the first thing we have to assure is that all the students are in Pratisvara mode of learning. Keeping the state of Pratisvara for a long time is not an easy task. To make students achieve this, we have to make them perform some specific activities which increases their concentration levels. Say for example, all students are in Pratisvara mode. We also call it as focus mode. And they are hearing the teacher's lecture. Then suddenly, one of the students opens a new beautiful geometry box from his bag. Seeing it, the adjacent boy now gets attracted towards the new geometry box. So now, his mind tells its brain to stop following the teacher lecture and ask the brain to follow the horse representing I. And now the prefrontal cortex thinks geometry box to be the important information and makes plan to send it to hippocampus instead of the teacher's lecture. Now once this diversion happens, then whatever the teacher was teaching and all his efforts goes in vain, and none of that information the student will be storing it in his memory. This is the reason why before we share our knowledge with others, we have to first see that the other person is in the state of Pratisvara to receive it, or else all our effort to share that information will be in vain. This process of Pratisvara is also called as concentration. We cannot build this concentration in children by force or by threatening or by beating them. For example, when the child gets diverted from the geometry box and if he is scolded for that, then that scolding will trigger his amygdala to respond with negative feelings. And now this feeling will block the recording of the information in his hippocampus. So now the biggest challenge we have in front of teachers is to make the children acquire the stage of Pratisvara before they start their lessons. This Pratisvara stage is nothing but building concentration and avoiding children from getting diverted from other sensory signals or information. The activities related to build a child concentration has to start right from the first year of children education. The two most powerful activities that can make the child remain concentrated for long periods are drawing and music. When the child is doing the drawing, it keeps its focus fully on the activity it is doing, and similarly, when a child is singing, it maintains its concentration level to the peak. In framing this new education policy, this factor of increasing the concentration levels were discussed and suggestions of many child psychologists were taken. And again here, some techniques used in our ancient learning processes like Mimamsa helped us to derive some special activities to children to increase their concentration. These special activities that can help increase concentration levels will be discussed in our last section of concepts, Kushalata. Yoga is also a form of activity that can be used to increase the students' concentration levels. If you take a convex lens and if you hold it to sun and make all the rays of sun converge at one single point, then the energy generated there can make any object catch fire. Similarly, Pratisvara process of converging the electrical signals coming from the 5 senses to one common point can generate a huge energy in the brain, and according to scientific study, this energy generated by converging signals from 5 senses to one common point can make a 500 watts bulb glow. Actually, scientifically speaking, what they say is for the brain to send an information from prefrontal cortex to hippocampus, it needs some additional energy or current. Now, when we concentrate all the signals coming from the 5 senses to one single point through Pratisvara, it generates the required additional current or power, and that makes that information go from prefrontal cortex to the hippocampus. So now if you recap what we have understood so far is that to make children learn effectively, we have to see that the children's sensory organs are focused in one direction. So this way of concentrating or converging all of the human resources to one single sense or information can also be achieved by repeating the same information in different form, so that what the child sees, what the child hears, what the child feels are all same. For example, when we are teaching new words of a language, the children should be encouraged to hear first the word when the teacher says, then repeat it with the teacher, and later also write it down a few times. This kind of combined sensory actions make the child concentrate on the information and practice to stay in the stage of Pratisvara for a longer time. Well, many more techniques we will be discussing later in our Kushalata section.